Well, good morning and welcome to Community North Baptist Church. We're so glad you're with us, whether you're in the room with us or if you're joining online today. We are starting a brand new series today, but it is a beautiful day outside. I know it got a little bit toasty yesterday. It's a reminder that Texas weather is Texas weather, so that is what it is. And that actually kind of ties into where we're going today, because I want to ask you something this morning. When was the last time that something in the natural world stopped you? Not a screen, not a notification, not a highlight reel, but something outside, something that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with the world as God made it. It's a sky that went pink at just the right moment at the sunset. A thunderstorm that reminded you how small you were, or a bird doing something ridiculous in your backyard, and it just makes you laugh out loud when no one else is watching. I've had some incredible experiences I've gotten to have in my life of some beautiful, beautiful places. One was the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And I had heard someone tell this story, and I'm like, I'm here, I'm going to do this. And so at night, we stayed 2 nights down in the canyon, and at night going out to the right at the Colorado River, and you're about as far away from light, like from man-made light, as you can get on the face of the planet, and looking up at the sky. And you can see, what we normally see, that's like layer 1, and then there's like the next layer, and the next layer, and the next layer, and the layer after that, and it's just amazing to see that sight. Now, at the same time we were down there, the next day we went on a hike. And you're down in the Grand Canyon, it looks as dry as could be and everything. And we find a place, and it's this little cove, this little enclosure, and you walk in, and water had found its way into this place. And so it's not like a waterfall necessarily, but water flowing in there. And it was one of the greenest places I've ever seen on the face of the earth, contrasted with, again, this dryness of the area around it and everything like that. Now, I have been to Anchorage. It's beautiful up there, and Washington State, got to spend a little bit of time there as well, and some beautiful places there. Colorado, love getting to go and experience that and all of those things. But to be honest with you, in spite of all of those things, and as much as I enjoy those things, or at the beach and just standing and watching the waves come in and listening to them as they roll in, I don't stop frequently enough. And most of us, that's probably the case. We move through the created world the way that we move through a parking lot, which is basically we're enough to not get hit by cars, hopefully. But we're not really paying attention to what's actually going on. And I've really been kind of wrestling with why that is. And I think part of it is that we have been handed a story about the natural world that makes it feel like it's just the scenery in the movie in which we are the star. It's background, it's the setting for the real story, which is about us. We're the main characters, and everything else is just a backdrop. But that's not really the way that the Bible describes it. And so now, today is Mother's Day, and I want to take a moment real fast and acknowledge that before we go any further. And for some, it's kind of this mix of things that go on today, because this is a day that has a lot of layers. For some, today's straightforward joy. You're celebrating someone who poured themselves into your life, and you are grateful. And that's right, and if that's your case, then you realize that's truly a gift. For others, today is a little bit more complicated. Maybe your relationship with your mother is difficult or unresolved. Maybe you wanted to be a mother and that hasn't happened in the way that you hoped. Maybe you're grieving someone. If that's where you are in any of that, I want you to know that you're not alone in the midst of that today. And this is a place that we can hold all of those things together. But here's what I want to say to all of us in the middle of that and how this ties into this message today. We'll take some time later in our service to recognize all of our women. But the way this ties in today is this. There's an instinct at the center of motherhood, so I have been told, since I am not one, obviously. But there's an instinct that's there to nurture something that has been entrusted to you, to give yourself to its flourishing, to care for what you didn't create and yet you are responsible for. And that instinct is not just beautiful, that instinct is actually theological. It's written into the fabric of what it means to be human. In this series, what we're talking about, being human, obviously flip human being around, but on what it actually means to be someone that God has created. And so God has created us to do exactly this in the world. But we have often made creation care into a political issue. And so if you say the word climate change, then you might get one side kind of flares up and the other side gets excited, and all of the midst of that and everything, and people start sorting each other into categories, and liberal, conservative, all of that. And once you do the sorting, everybody kind of stops listening. But what I want us to do this morning is I want us to go back to the place before the politics. I want us to go back before the culture wars. I want us to go back to the beginning, to the garden, to the very first humans, to the assignment that God gave, the very first assignment that God gave to the people that he created. Because what we find here, again, isn't a political position, it's a description of what it actually means to be human. And when we recover that, everything else begins to start to make sense. So we're actually going to be in Genesis 1 to start today. And so it'll be on the screen in just a moment. But the creation narrative, and many have heard it before, but there's something in here that even if you're familiar with the story, we tend to kind of read past it. So we're going to pick up in Genesis 1, starting in verse 26. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock, over all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground.' So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.'" So we see words rule over and subdue, and those words have caused a lot of damage over the years. Because for centuries, many have read this passage as permission. Permission to take whatever we want from the world, to take it, to use it without consequence, because, well, God said it's ours, that we're in charge, that the earth is a resource, and resources are just for using. But that reading collapses when you look at the Hebrew that this was actually written in, as it was written in the Hebrew language. And the word that is translated rule here actually doesn't mean dominate. It doesn't mean exploit. The same word is used in other places in the Old Testament to describe a shepherd who is shepherding their flock, which is careful, attentive, responsible for what has been entrusted to you. So it's not a license for extraction, it's a calling to stewardship, which is just like being a parent. Like you've been, if you're a parent, you've been entrusted with this child or these children and all of that, and it's not like your job is to make my life easier. And again, if you've been a parent, you kind of laugh at that statement and go, yeah, that's not really how that works. But instead, it's this great thing that we have been entrusted with. And then we go to the next chapter, Genesis 2, and it makes it even clearer. Genesis 2, verse 15, it says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." Work it and take care of it. So these two words together are very important. Work it means to cultivate it, to invest it, to bring out what's in it, and to take care of it, to guard, to protect, to preserve. And together they paint this picture that's not of an owner that's doing whatever they want with their property, but of a gardener. A gardener is someone who shows up and they pay attention and they pour themselves into something that often doesn't belong to them. So we're gardeners, not owners. We're gardeners, not owners. So here's the question that follows from that. If God made us to be gardeners in the world, what happens when we're not? What does it cost the world when the people who've been entrusted with its care walk away from that responsibility? And we see that. There's the Apostle Paul, who in the New Testament in Romans 8, he gives an answer to that very thing. So Romans 8, starting in verse 19. Paul writes this, he's writing to the Romans there. He says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself would be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. This is such a powerful phrase. The whole creation is groaning. It's waiting. Paul says that creation is caught in kind of this longing, not just for some sort of rescue from decay, but for the people who are supposed to tend it and care for it to finally become who they were created to be. This isn't a guilt trip. It's an invitation. Creation is waiting for us to recover our humanity, waiting for us to remember what we were created to do. And now I want to approach something here directly. So many of us have grown up in an eschatology. Eschatology meaning a talk about the end times, the theory and a certain set of beliefs on the end times. And that eschatology has made it sound like what we're talking about today is really, there's no point to it. So basically that view was that if the world is going to be destroyed anyway, if God is going to burn it all up and take us somewhere else, then why does it matter how we treat it? And if that view is being held, it makes sense why a lot of things are done the way that they're done. But that's a real and sincere theological position. And I understand, again, where people come up with it, and that's a lot of where I grew up and everything in the midst of it. But what I want to suggest is that Scripture actually kind of pushes back on that view. And we read this passage last week in the second service, but Revelation 21, one of my absolute favorite passages in Scripture, Revelation 21, next to last chapter in the Bible, starting in verse 1. It says, "Then I saw a new heaven and new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. There was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem," and watch what it's doing, "coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.' He who was seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' Then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.'" Notice what happens in that vision. God doesn't take us away from the earth in it. The new Jerusalem comes down to earth. Heaven comes here. And the promise is not escape from creation. It's the renewal of creation. It's the Garden of Eden starts it, and at the end of the Bible we look and there's a garden again being made right. I am making everything new, not I am making everything gone. The word for new there in the Greek, it means renewed, restored, made fresh, not destroyed and replaced, but transformed. And so this is what Romans 8 is pointing towards this time. Creation isn't groaning because it's waiting to be discarded. It's groaning because it's waiting to be set free. The same resurrection power that raised Jesus from the dead is the power that one day will renew the entire created order. And so if that's true, then caring for creation now is not polishing the brass on a sinking ship. It's participating in what God has already declared that he's going to do. It's living now in the direction of the future that God has promised. It's treating the world the way that God intended us to treat it, with restoration, with care, and with the long view. And so the theological truth that's underneath all of this is God didn't just create the world and call it good. And he did do that. He created the world and he called it good, but he also entrusted it. He made humans in his own image, then he puts them in the garden, and he says to them, "This is yours to tend and to take care of." Everything that he made, the mountains, the oceans, the soil, the atmosphere, the thousands of species that we haven't even met and certainly haven't named yet, all of it was placed in our hands, not to own, but to keep and to care for. So God made it. He asked us to keep it. God made it. He asked us to keep it. And again, we're gardeners, not owners. And the whole creation is groaning, waiting for us to remember what we were made to do. So what does this actually matter in how we actually live? Why are we talking about this in church on a Sunday morning? Well, let me be clear about what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that you have to have a thorough opinion on every piece of environmental legislation that comes out, or become the activist, or carry a particular political identity. Creation care doesn't belong, or it certainly shouldn't belong, to just one party. What it means is this: if you are a follower of Jesus, by definition, you're someone who should take the created world seriously. And so it's not because of politics, it's because of theology, our view of God. Because God made this world, he called it good, and he entrusted it to people like us. And then here's the uncomfortable truth. The church over the years has largely been absent from this conversation. We've conceded it to others, and in doing so, we have communicated unintentionally but fairly clearly that the earth doesn't really matter to us, that our faith is only about spiritual things and not about physical things. But there's a God who became flesh. He walked on dirt, he touched lepers, he ate fish, and he wept at a graveside. That God cares deeply about the physical world. The kingdom that Jesus announces is not an escape from creation, it's the restoration of creation. So what does faithful stewardship look like for regular people just living regular lives? Well, it starts small. It really does start small. It doesn't have to be about huge heroics. It can start with asking the question, am I actually paying attention? Am I present in the created world? Or again, am I just moving through it like a parking lot? Am I asking, am I wasteful? Not in a guilt-laden way, but practically. Do my habits reflect someone who believes that these resources belong to God and that they're not actually infinite? What about asking this, who bears the cost when we're careless? And this is where the justice part of this comes in. Environmental degradation doesn't fall equally on everyone. The people who suffer the most when there's impure and polluted water, when there's compromised air quality, when there's the downstream effects of extraction and everything else, the people that are affected the most are almost always the poor. So caring for creation and caring for the vulnerable are not separate conversations. They're the same conversation, the same concern. So now, I don't know that anybody in this room this week can go solve the global problem. If so, wonderful, let me know and we will get fully behind you in that. But what we can do is we can start by saying, what's one decision that I can make, that I can do differently to make a difference? That I can pay attention in a way that I haven't before. And so again, we can teach our kids that the earth isn't a resource to be used up, it's a gift to be tended. We can let our faith shape our relationship with the physical world, starting with the patch of it that we actually live in. And so, maybe you're here this morning, whether in the room or again online, and you're not really sure what you believe about any of this, about God, about faith, about whether any of this is real or matters. That's okay. You're welcome here exactly as you are. But I want you to hear this. The question then for you this morning isn't really as much about the environment. It's about what kind of creature you are, whether you have been made for something. Whether the instinct that you feel when you stand in front of something that is beautiful, an ocean, a mountain range, a sky full of stars, whether that instinct is actually pointing somewhere. And I think that it is. I think that longing is built into us. And I think that the story of the Bible tells us that we were made in the very image of God. That God looked at everything he made and said it was good. And by the way, when he looked at the humans that he had made, he said, very good. That's something that it's worth us sitting with and wrestling with. Not because you have to believe it and have it all figured out today, but because it just might be true. And if it is, it really does change everything. Now, what would it look like for us as a church to take this seriously? Not perfectly, and again, not a program, not a committee, not a 5-year plan, whatever, but just genuinely. If we became known in McKinney as a people who paid attention to the world that God created, who took care of the patch of the earth that we have been given, who teach our kids, again, that what we do with creation matters to God, who ask in our ordinary decisions whether our choices reflect people who believe that the earth belongs to God and not to us. I love that we get to sit in this room and you can look outside, and especially if I'm going too long in the middle of the message, and you can look outside and you can look around, and I've got the view looking out the back where I can see the wildflowers that are still straight out there. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing, and to take all of that in, and again to say, there's something about this. But if we became a church that cares about clean water in our city, because God cares about it, that cares about green spaces and healthy soil and neighbors who, again, live downstream from the decisions that are made upstream, that creation care isn't political, it's theological, because we actually believe what it says in Genesis and what God says throughout his word. And again, those in this room, something about this. Every mother, who's ever handed something beautiful to a child, a shell, a caterpillar, a handful of wildflowers, and said, isn't this something? That's theology. That's passing on the instinct that God has put inside us, the instinct to notice, the instinct to tend and to care for what we didn't make, but what we've been asked to keep. And that's the first part of what it means to be human. Not to just exist in the world, but to tend it and to make it a better place for others in the world, to be present in it, to hold it in a way that a gardener holds a garden, with attention, with care, and again, with the long view. God looked at everything he made and said it was good, and then he handed it to us. May we be worthy of what God has trusted to us. Let's pray together.